D.M. Armstrong on what philosophers should do. David Armstrong argued that philosophers should give an account of the general nature of things and of man, and also analyze concepts. David Malay Armstrong, 1926 to 2014, was an Australian philosopher who studied philosophy at the universities of Sydney and Oxford. He did much work in metaphysics and the philosophy of mind. Like his fellow Australian J.J.C. Smart, 1920 to 2012, Armstrong influenced an entire generation of Australian philosophers. The Australian philosopher Keith Campbell, for example, said that Armstrong's contributions to philosophy helped to shape philosophy's agenda and terms of debate. Armstrong's philosophy is taken to be naturalistic. His overall position, i.e., naturalistic metaphysics, accepted, as stated in his sketch for a systematic metaphysics, the assumption that all that exists is the space-time world, the physical world, as we say. In addition, Armstrong believed that philosophers should make sure that their theories and ideas square with, or, at the very least take on board, what the sciences tell them about the world. Armstrong was influenced by David Lewis, an American philosopher who had strong ties to Australia, J.J.C. Smart, a fellow Australian, Ullen Place, Herbert Feigl, Gilbert Ryle, and G.E. Moore. In terms of prose style, Armstrong's writings are clear and direct, in the Australian style. On philosophy itself. In his paper, The Causal Theory of Mind, 1968, D.M. Armstrong argued that philosophers in the analytic tradition swung back from Wittgensteinian and even Ryleyan pessimism to a more traditional conception of the proper role and tasks of philosophy. And Armstrong believed that the proper role and task of philosophy was to give an account of the general nature of things and of man. All this was largely Armstrong's reaction to the stress on what was called conceptual analysis, or more broadly, philosophical analysis, found in analytic philosophy at the time. Armstrong wrote these words in 1968. That said, Armstrong still saw conceptual analysis as being important in philosophy. Following on from all that, while many analytic philosophers accept that such things as conceptual analysis, explanation, definition, etc. are fruitful tools of philosophy, they still don't believe that these things are all that there is to philosophy. So what did Armstrong have to say on what philosophers should do? But firstly, note the word should here. This isn't a claim that all philosophers actually do all the things which Armstrong will mention. Thus, it can be assumed here that Armstrong simply believed that they should do these things. In other words, Armstrong was being both metaphilosophical and normative in his statements. What philosophers should do. I'll quote an entire passage from D.M. Armstrong in which he states both his aforementioned metaphilosophical and normative position on philosophy. Armstrong wrote the following words: "The philosopher has certain special skills. These include the stating and assessing of the worth of arguments, including the bringing to light and making explicit suppressed premises of arguments, the detection of ambiguities and inconsistencies, and, perhaps especially, the analysis of concepts. What won't be discussed in the following are the following questions. 1. Do philosophers actually have special skills? 2. How would a layperson know that any given philosopher had special skills? 3. Which philosophers or kinds of philosopher was Armstrong actually referring to? So let's break down Armstrong's own words. On philosophical argument. Firstly, Armstrong begins in the following way. The philosopher has certain special skills. These include the stating and assessing of the worth of arguments. It can easily be argued that argumentation is vital in philosophy. Indeed, if a philosopher, or a layperson, doesn't offer an argument for his position or viewpoint, then why on earth should anyone else accept it in the first place? Of course, there are indeed various, perhaps even many, reasons as to why people may accept a position or viewpoint without it being argumentatively advanced or defended. These include the following. 1. The reader or listener already agrees with much, or even all, of what's being stated, i.e., not argued, by the speaker or writer. 2. The listener or reader finds the writer's or speaker's prose style, say its rhetoric and poetry, emotionally appealing. That said, it would probably only be emotionally appealing if, at least in part, the listener or reader already agreed with much, or even all, of what's being stated. 3. The reader or listener doesn't really understand what's being said, but he or she takes the speaker or writer to be some kind of expert or authority on the given subject. 4. The reader or listener feels emotionally, socially, or politically obliged to agree with what's stated by the speaker or writer. 5. The reader or listener simply doesn't know of any arguments against, or even alternatives to, what's being stated by the speaker or writer. Suppressed premises. More particularly, Armstrong believed that one of the special skills of philosophers includes the stating and assessing of the worth of arguments. The obvious question to ask here is exactly how other people's arguments are stated and assessed by philosophers with special skills. Armstrong immediately goes on to answer that question when he says that the worth of arguments is stated and assessed, at least partly, by the bringing to light and making explicit the suppressed premises of arguments. The possible suppressing of premises, either deliberately or unknowingly, is of vital importance in nearly all debates or discussions, especially political ones. See hidden, suppressed premises. To put this at its most basic. In an argument, the suppressed premise or suppressed premises is simply assumed to be true from the very beginning. Indeed, the argument wouldn't even work at all if the suppressed premise wasn't assumed to be true from the start. In other words, the entire position, or argument, depends on the reader or listener, as well as the speaker or writer himself. Accepting the suppressed premise, either knowingly or unwittingly, as being true, or at least as simply existing, i.e., as being an assumed fact. That said, often suppressed premises aren't, strictly speaking, part of an argument at all. That is, such premises may simply be part of a stream of poetic or rhetorical statements expressed by, say, an activist, politician, scientist, or even a philosopher. The detection of ambiguities and inconsistencies. Armstrong then mentions the detection of ambiguities and inconsistencies. One would like to believe that literally everyone would have a problem with arguments, or simply positions, which contain ambiguities and inconsistencies. That said, the notion of ambiguity seems to be more, well, ambiguous than the notion of inconsistency. That said, not all inconsistencies are easy to spot either. Thus, in a certain sense, an argument may be strong, valid, and/or sound, and still be expressed in an ambiguous manner. Or, less strongly, such an argument may simply contain ambiguous phrases or ambiguous individual words. In that case, then, the entire argument won't necessarily fail simply because some phrases or words within it are ambiguous, or simply taken to be ambiguous. All that doesn't seem to also apply as clearly to an argument containing inconsistencies. That said, such inconsistencies may be a result of certain ambiguities, and certain ambiguities may be the result of certain inconsistencies. This means that the notions of ambiguity and inconsistency need a lot of work in themselves. The analysis of concepts. The analysis of things. D.M. Armstrong finishes off his account of the special skills of philosophers by mentioning what he called the analysis of concepts. Despite the analysis of concepts being a worthwhile philosophical skill, Armstrong did offer some words of warning. For example, Armstrong argued that Gilbert Ryle was wrong in taking the analysis of concepts to be the end of philosophy. Armstrong himself, on the other hand, believed that the analysis of concepts is a means by which the philosopher makes his contribution to great general questions, not about concepts, but about things. Oddly enough, Armstrong's position seems to have been replicated by the British philosopher Colin McGinn, 1950-, at least according to Barry Dainton and Howard Robinson. The latter two philosophers write, Colin McGinn has recently defended the view that philosophy is, and should be, a matter of conceptual analysis, although McGinn does not think this is incompatible with analysis revealing truths pertaining to reality itself. Yet, Timothy Williams